Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Let's Skill Up podcast. I'm joined by my partner in crime, Charles Fellingham, and we are here today to, just like always, jam out about training, lessons learned, facilitation, best practices, what we can do to really maximize the impact that we have with our learners slash participants in the training room and after the training room, right? The whole entire goal of these conversations is to see how we can drive business impact through the great work that we do. So today's topic is the difference between facilitating virtual instructor-led training and instructor-led training. So when we're in a physical room versus being in a virtual room. So Charles, to get us kicked off, what would you say are some of the key differences that you note between physical, in-person, and being virtual?
The way we get and sustain engagement. One would say it's easier in a live room to get people engaged. You can look in their eyes, you can call them by name, you can build relationships physically in the room when they're walking in. And in a virtual session, generally they show up right on time. I don't know the last virtual session I actually started at the top of the hour when it was supposed to start, because that's when people come in. So just getting people to engage virtually is different than getting people to engage in a live room.
And when you say engagement, just so that we define that for our listeners here, how would you define engagement? What does engagement look like to you?
Yeah. So, in one of our prior podcasts, and I'm sure in the future ones we'll repeat it, is you don't talk so much, you get them to talk. Don't tell, ask. And so if we're asking people, we need their response. And in a virtual setting, I generally get 2 or 3 very enthusiastic responders, and everybody else is just sitting in the background, probably on another browser. I don't know. And just getting people to open up in mass is a challenge virtually, less so in the live room.
Why do you think that is? What do you think are some of the psychological barriers that people have in virtual settings versus in person?
Yeah, hard to say. I think people just naturally feel a little more disengaged in a virtual setting. I always like to say when I launch a virtual setting, I say, welcome everybody. One of my main rules is engage, be in the moment, whatever obstacles you have that might be distracting, put them away. But thank God it's a virtual setting, so there's no opportunity for any distractions, and everybody laughs. Mm-hmm. Even the ones who are less likely to engage later, they still get it. And so that's the battle virtually.
Yep. One tip that I've seen from Michael Bungay-Stanier actually is he starts pretty much at least every webinar that I've seen him do with asking a question of just a self-reflection, or you can put it in the chat if you want, but how intentionally engaged do you want to be? How focused do you want to be during this time that we have? Right. 1 is I'm taking a nap on the couch. A 10 is I've closed my email, I've closed all notifications, I've thrown my phone across the room, I can't see it, and I'm fully engaged in taking notes. So that self-reflection question and that commitment, in a sense, can help people to truly engage and hook in and commit to being mentally present, at least in the session.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think getting that commitment up front is huge. So one of the ways in which I do it, both virtually and live, is if people react, they laugh, or they smile, or they just give you a nonverbal reaction, recognize it. Mm-hmm. Just like you're nodding right now, I could say, Karie's nodding, I see she gets it. Tell me more about why. And now all of a sudden, I've got you engaged because you gave me permission just by reacting. Now, You've got to do that early in the session, whether it's live or virtual, to call people out based on reaction so that people get used to the fact that you will be calling them by name and asking for a response. Mm-hmm. So use whatever they give you to ignite them to want to verbally respond to you.
There always has to be a reason, right? We have in many of my conversations with other trainers, we've talked about calling people out and making people feel uncomfortable by
Yeah.
calling on them. And the big thing is that we have to give them a reason. For example, if someone wrote something in the chat that was interesting, we can ask them to come off of mute and expand on their thoughts. Or we could say, Charles, you are a sales expert and your experience in sales. What would you think about this particular topic, right? So frame it from that perspective of here's the reason why I want your perspective and value your perspective, and then we make it a little bit safer to call them out or to ask them to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, and so you've got to once again be consistent. And I have a pad, or I have one of these little sketchbooks beside me when I do virtual sessions. And if there's somebody that I haven't heard from for a while, I'll write their name down just to remember to call on them and give them a chance. One of the big differences too is small groups with live and virtual sessions. We don't take breaks as facilitators, sorry, but we don't. And when there's a group breakout and you've got pods of people in a live session in a small group, you want to go over to the group, but you don't want to just stand there quietly, walk away without adding something, because they're expecting you to add something. You've observed them doing an exercise, comment.
Mm-hmm.
In a virtual session, I always go to the breakouts, but I let them know the reason I'm coming in is because I want to make sure the instructions were clear. I generally don't like to make comments in breakouts in a virtual session. I let them work out. But I will remember things they say so I can use it in the main room when they come back from their virtual breakout session.
Exactly. We are much more disruptive, right? When we jump into breakout rooms in the virtual setting, people say, "Oh, the trainer's here." We have to.
Right.
I've heard things like, "Okay, Karie, this is what we have been talking about. They're filling me in,"
Yeah.
and I agree. The purpose for me jumping in is to make sure that everything is clear, to make sure that they're on track,
Yeah.
and potentially, just like in person, if there's a coaching opportunity, then we can jump in for a coaching opportunity. If something was not clear, if there's an opportunity to build on what they're saying, I completely agree.
One of the things also with a virtual session that I like to emphasize right at the beginning, this is a leadership workshop. And I have a rule for leaders when it's my team on a virtual session. Everybody should be prepared to be on camera. And with that, people will launch their cameras once I say that. I mean, how influential would you be if people can't see you and know you and allow yourself to be available? And I reward people who come onto camera. And I think it's really important in a virtual session so you can see their reaction, so you can call on them for the facilitator, but it's even more important for the participant so that everybody can see that everybody is available for the training.
Exactly. Expanding on that, one thing that we can do both in person and virtual, depending on how much time we have, is establish team rules or ground rules, if we want to call it that. But any kind of group collaborative, co-created agreement to how we're going to interact together and how we're going to make the most of our time. And that's where things like being on camera, starting on time, ending on time, which is really important to our participants too.
It'll be late.
Those agreements can be put into place too. And we can leverage that, again, that agreement, that commitment at the beginning throughout the rest of our time with them to make sure that we drive that engagement and get the most out of our time.
Yeah.
I feel like what I've been hearing a lot about virtual is it's starting to get a bad rap. So what would you say are some of the things that you're hearing that indicate that virtual training is getting a bad rap? What are some reasons why that reputation is starting to happen?
Great question. We need to talk about this. Virtual really exploded because of COVID. Thank you, COVID. And there was also, it became an experiment when it was happening because companies felt as though they could save travel budget by doing things virtually. L&D leaders have reached the conclusion, I believe, in general, that live training is more effective. And virtual training, for the reasons that we've already talked about, the distractions, the opportunity to do multitasking is not as effective in training transfer of training. Coaching in the moment in a live session is so invaluable, and I think that's where they see the value in bringing people together to collaborate in learning and share experiences, network, build relationships. Live just offers so much more opportunity for that than virtual. That's the main thing I'm seeing.
Have you seen, though, the opportunity to get that connection, to get that coaching in the moment virtually?
Yes. I mean, when you're in a virtual session, you want to implore the people when they go into breakouts, if there's somebody in the room they don't know, expand your network, create peer partners, exchange emails, build those relationships. This is your opportunity. So you want to make sure that people recognize there's learning going on, yes, but there's also an opportunity to expand their horizons by knowing more people in the organization.
Exactly. I think another benefit I would say that virtual has over in person is the chat. And that's a great way for people to connect, to build relationships, and to get that camaraderie that often happens in person, also in the virtual setting. Again, we have to make sure that we drive that engagement, create that safe space for people to leverage the chat. But that's a great way for people to take even more advantage over that virtual over in person. Oftentimes we don't necessarily think about that when we're thinking virtual versus in person, but there are many ways to replicate the elements that you talked about, the coaching in the moment, the engagement, the connection, the camaraderie building, all of that in the virtual setting. It boils down to how are we designing this session to facilitate those elements? And I think what I'm seeing from a virtual standpoint is it goes back to your original concepts, right? Why do we go virtual and why are we continuing with virtual? Because it's scalable. So we need to get this information to people as quickly as possible. But notice where I'm focusing, right? Just on information, just on knowledge. And when we focus just on knowledge transfer, we know that that isn't truly moving the needle on what we're trying to achieve. So how do we design for the skill building, the behavior change, the business results? That then informs the coaching in the moment, the connections, the leveraging of the chat to drive that psychological safety and the connections.
Yeah, it's so important for a designer. And if you're a facilitator watching this that also does design, to really think about being a participant in a virtual setting and what your content looks like and how it's being transferred through exercises and activities and application. So be sure that you've got plenty of those and that the learning happens based on your design. One of the things I did want to mention also is that in our workshop for training trainers, we have a little segment on improving your virtual presence, where you actually we give you the best practices and tips and tricks and all of that on how you can improve your virtual presence. And then we ask you to self-assess. Go online, launch your Zoom or whatever platform Teams you use, look at how you're positioned and all of that, and then improve it. Because this is a personal brand statement, is how you present yourself virtually. Just says so much about you as a person and as a leader.
Completely agree. We set the stage, right? We create the environment, especially when it's virtual.
Right.
I often think about in my training, whether it's in person or virtual, learning accountability. So making sure that every single person, every single individual is accountable for their learning. And this is one of the things that I do find easier to do in person, because it's easy to say, it's saying, how can I get everyone to engage, to create some friction with the thing that we're talking about and actually take it on, right? Try it, practice it, discuss it. So in person, it's very easy to impromptu say, talk to the person right next to you about how you would apply X, Y, and Z, right?
Right.
And when we translate that to virtual, that impromptu, ad hoc, talk to the person right next to you, what are some of the ways that you do that to drive that learning accountability?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I prepare for people to go into a breakout activity, I usually ask them to, if you understand the instructions of what you'll be doing in your breakout room, do the following. Let's say I'm asking them to go in and have a conversation about how to coach somebody in a difficult performance review. I'll say, but if everybody understands the instructions on what you'll be doing in the breakout room, please type in chat the subject that you'll be talking to this or coaching this person on. And that way they put in chat a little information that helps me, but it also helps people going into the breakout to understand what people are coming in with.
Mm-hmm.
So find creative ways to make sure the instructions are clear by asking them to sort of validate content. If you're asking them to go in and tell a story, what's the moral of the story? Type that in chat to let me know we're clear about the instructions.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, people have an opportunity to go in prepared, and others see it and they have an opportunity to, have conversations about that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's great. That's a great tip. One other thing that I also do virtually to try to replicate this is set up a quick breakout room and use the random assignments option that Zoom and Teams both have with one other person, two other people potentially. Say, quick 5-minute discussion. How might you apply this in your real world, right? In your job.
Yeah.
And we can build that in just like we do in person. It's just a little bit more logistics that we have to add in when we're virtual.
So true. I mean, I always end sessions, whether it's live or virtual, with, as a result of this learning, what's one thing you're going to deploy immediately as a result of the learning that you're going to commit to use? And I have, I'll say 100% participation in chat. I always like to say that because it invites people. And so, and I do it in the live session too. I go around the room and have them verbalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's going to acknowledge it. And I make sure in a virtual session that for those who speak out, I reward them, but I also try to reward every response in some way on chat, even if I don't have time to get to everybody's, but I want to thank those of you who put your response in chat. Excellent responses.
Exactly.
What gets rewarded, is an invitation to do more of that.
Mm-hmm. So true. So true. So, all right. So rounding out our conversation, we've talked about a lot. What would you say are the top tips that you would give to trainers who are trying to recreate the in-person virtually?
Yeah. So be sure to give everybody a chance to engage. Start early, to call them out by name in a very elegant way. Reward their responses, keep a list of people who aren't participating, and be sure to give them an opportunity to do the same. And even if it's something they said in the breakout where they feel more free, bring it into the main room and say, Elijah just spoke about in the breakout. Elijah, can you expand on that for us? So give people everybody the opportunity to engage and have a success.
Exactly. Drive that learning accountability, right? Well, thanks everyone for joining us on today's Let's Skill Up podcast. If you enjoyed this and if you want more of these tips, you can find plenty of our trainer tips in our playbook, which you can find on our letsskillup.com website. And of course, we'll continue to talk about tips, lessons learned, and battle stories in these Let's Skill Up podcasts. So come back to our next podcast and we look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.